Atticus just briefly, he researches the ways in which language revitalization can be augmented by new technologies. So he's taught courses in general linguistics and technologies for language documentation, and has worked with community members of Musqueam in developing a spoken dictionary. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Atticus, for your presentation.
Thanks, Pam. I guess first thing to say, that's a tough act to follow. But my presentation is going to be a little bit more, less personal and more of a survey of the different technologies that are being used nowadays. And actually, this is sort of interesting because Rand mentioned more than a few of them. And so hopefully I can shine a little bit more light on them. And the idea here is just to sort of show you what's around, because I think a lot of these are known maybe to linguists, but not necessarily everybody else. So I am going to share my screen here, and I think that should be good. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we're talking about language technology, and language technology is a pretty broad topic that I think we can just describe generally as anything that uses, sorry, I didn't realize this was moving here. There we go. Anything that we can use language for to preserve and promote Indigenous languages. And I mean, that's pretty broad, but it also has exploded in the last few years. 10 years ago, there was significantly less in terms of language technology for Indigenous languages. So the main things that we're going to look at are first, just what's documentation and what's revitalization. I think we all know them, but I just want to make sure the difference is clear, because the technologies that are used are pretty substantially different. And then, yeah, we're going to talk about documentation techniques and technologies, revitalization technologies, and we'll wrap it all up. So our documentation and revitalization difference, when I'm talking about them at the very least, what I mean is that language documentation is when we are in the process of recording, preserving, or archiving languages. So keeping them for future use or for other purposes, not necessarily analyzing them though, just the actual process of recording them. And then language revitalization is the process of promoting the use of language in various aspects. So that can be things like teaching the language. It can be things like creating schools to teach the language, or even something like making sure your signs in your community are in the languages that you want them to be in. So if we talk about documentation technology, there's a couple different types that I'd like to highlight. The first are just really basic recording technologies. These are the things that we will cover in classes on, like how to do language documentation. And the idea here is you just need something that has a microphone and that can record things. So, anybody using a laptop, actually, I mean, anybody using in this call right now is using something with a microphone. That's how you're able to speak into it. And these are usually pretty fine when you're talking about preserving a language in terms of just making a record of something that was said. Same with cell phones. Cell phones have obviously built-in microphones. They're super portable, a little bit more portable. You can hold them right up to a person's mouth. Really good for recording, but these are not necessarily super high quality, archival quality devices. For that, you probably want something that's a separate device whose only purpose is to record, something like a personal audio recorder, which is what we see, this black rectangle here. This one is made to be taken into the field. It's made to basically be beaten up. It can survive falls and drops. If you want, you can plug expensive microphones into this, but you don't need to. It has some pretty good ones in it already. And obviously, these are super portable and super good for commenting and for documenting speech in the field. But when it comes to these, the idea is the best recorder is the one that you have. It's like a camera. The best camera is the one that you have. So what we often say is if something is worth doing well, it's worth doing mediocrely. If all you have is a cell phone, documenting with that is infinitely better than not documenting at all. But once we start talking about actual software, we start getting into the things that Ryan was talking about. So this is something called Audacity. It's a program that is built to record. You use something with a microphone, usually a computer, and you record directly into Audacity here. Audacity works for Windows or Mac or Linux distributions. It's free, it's open source. It looks a little bit daunting, particularly this screenshot, but it's actually pretty easy to use. And the thing is, because it's like a standard tool, there are hundreds of videos on how to use it. So Audacity is something that a lot of people working in the space of documenting will make use of. It allows you to, edit audio. You can go back and play. You can increase the volume, and you can also add labels or annotations, we'll call it, which basically just say that between certain times this is the word that is said. So here I say between these times the word this is there. Next, between these times, so between like 4 1/3 and 5 seconds, the word is said, and so on and so forth. These create they create time-aligned text and audio, which are the basis for things like subtitles. Can be really useful. If you want to go and find a word, you know exactly what time to go to. So Audacity is a pretty widely used suite, and it's free. There is also something called Twisted Wave, which, here we go, it switched. Twisted Wave is a sort of pared down version of Audacity. It looks a little bit more user-friendly. You can still record stuff into it. The advantage of this, though, is that it works in a browser. It's still free, and because it works in a browser, it also works on things like Chromebooks, which sometimes you can't install Audacity on. So this was, I think, an important thing. A lot of the people I've worked with, that's what they were given by their school boards. So having something like this is useful. The downside to this is you can't label, you can't provide annotations. Also, this isn't something you download to your computer. So everything that you record into this stays on the server of the company that makes Twisted Wave for 90 days. I have never heard of them doing anything untoward with that, but if you have sensitive material, that's definitely something you want to keep track of, because you don't want people having things they shouldn't have. Then the next item here for documentary software is something called Speech Database. So this is something that I've been a part of building. It's the lab that I work with has created. And the idea with this is that we had community members that worked in Musqueam and other communities that we wanted to continue recording and getting recordings of during the pandemic. They wanted to continue working with us, but obviously much of the elders we were working with, it wasn't safe. So we built something like this. They can load it up on they can go to a website, record directly into this. We control the servers. So, we had a relationship with them. They trusted us to keep the data. And they can write what they said. In this case, I recorded Tanse. I just put the English recording as hello. The recording pops up there. If I liked it, I could save it. Pretty simple interface. We try not to put too much there otherwise. And, the use rights that we had always applied with the community, so they owned everything. But just for the server of the servers that were running this website happened to be maintained. I think these ones happened to be at the U of A, but that was all worked out beforehand. The other nice thing about SpeechDB is that it allows you to then also go through an interface like this, where you can listen to a recording, say whether or not it's good or bad, say whether or not it is the right word, the translation's correct, flag it for review. And for a word or two, this doesn't seem that useful, but when you have, thousands of words that have been uploaded to this, this is a really easy interface that doesn't require you to start up a bunch of other applications. It's quite user-friendly, takes minimal training, and is I think quite useful for distance-based research. Looking for another one, here's one that Rayanne mentioned, which was Elan. Elan is software that allows you basically to take pre-existing video or audio or both and mark up or annotate it. So the same way that we saw with Audacity, you can say, you know, between these times, these are the words that are being said. It works with video too, so you can say like, this is the gesture that's happening at this point. If you hear a bird chirping, you can be like, there's a bird chirping, you can have that in a comment. It's a pretty useful tool. It is also free, like everything else we've seen so far. The only downside with Elan is that it only works with like on computers, so Windows, Mac, or Linux. It's also not particularly the most user-friendly. It's not hard to use, but there's just a lot that it throws at you to start. So that's one of the things that we found. A lot of people will start them with Audacity, and then maybe if they need to, we can move to something like Elan because there's just a lot of it. But Elan is made for this annotation. And so, you know, once you have things annotated, you can see I have a list of words here. I can go through them and be like, you know, I want to hear someone say "sapwapatam," and it tells us when that starts, when that stops. I can actually click it and it would bring me there. Okay, now we have Flex. Flex is a software that allows you to create essentially dictionaries. It's a field work all-in-one mostly, but it's really good. It allows you to take a word. You can say, you know, what the root form of the word is, what the base form is, however you want to define that. You can give, in this case, we have English and Portuguese translations. We can give grammatical information if we feel that's important. But what's really cool about this is it allows you to create relationships between words. So you can say, you know, these two words mean something similar, or these two words mean something opposite. It allows these relations to be built. And then from this, you can use this to create dictionaries. You can use this to create databases with words in them if that's really what you're looking for. It is free as well. It only works for Windows though. And you can see here we have a couple of different options. So it can even work with like larger text collections, not just single words. I'll talk a little bit more about the company that makes this because they also make this next one, which is called Say More. Say More is something that we use to keep track of all of the different data about data. We call this metadata. So when we want to talk about who our participants are, who these language revitalizers are, whether or not they've signed consent forms from a researcher perspective, or whether or not they're from a particular community, we can add data about that. We can even add data about their name, what languages they speak, their identities, pictures. We can put pictures of them. From that, we can create recordings for those people, and we can get them to speak, running text. That's what we see up top here. We can even get them to speak careful pronunciations of things. So not sentences, but careful, slow recitations. And then once we have these recitations, we can give it into the system that automatically chops those up into word or multi-word pieces. And then we can go through and create annotations for each of those. So it does the chopping up automatically. And then in this case, this is, I believe, Thai. We can then go through and say, this is what the word is in Thai, and this is what it means in English. And in this case, it's probably a sentence, not a single word, but, and you can always go through, you can see this resegment. You can go through and adjust this manually so that if the system doesn't do great, it still gives you something. This is a super useful tool. The only downside with this is, again, it's only on Windows. There's also then a bit of an issue with the company that makes this is basically a Bible translation company. So some groups don't particularly like using it, or the other, or Flex, like we saw before, just because of the group that has created it. Or alternatively, because they don't have a Windows machine. I don't use this for the same reason. But I know a lot of Indigenous groups who've done it. I know it was used at SILR for years. So Those were documentation technologies. Those were ways that we make records, some ways that we make records. But now I'm going to talk about some ways that we create actual revitalization. So the start of a lot of these revitalization technologies is that they have some sort of language model that either can analyze a word or generate it. Basically, all this means is that, you know, if it's given a Cree word like Nikiwapamau, which means I saw him, it can break that apart to its constituent pieces, and then it can give you either the English translation or some other language, I suppose. So in this case, we see Nikiwapamau is, it's recognizing there's a first person singular, there's a past tense, so it happened before, there's something that involves seeing, and then something that involves a third person. Once you have a model like this, which usually has to be coded by hand, and I'm not going to go into how that's done here, but once you have a model like that, you can create something that we call a smart dictionary, which are just dictionaries that try to anticipate your needs. So here's one that I've been involved with called Itwewana. It's a Plants Cree dictionary. It's got a pretty simple interface, and you'll notice immediately you can start searching in either Cree or in English. You actually don't have to choose which option you're going for. You can just start typing and it'll figure it out, which is good because I know with older dictionaries that didn't do this, that was like 99% of my issues was I just forgot to change the language. The system also allows you to change orthographies used. So in this case, we have something that allows it to go either through Roman orthography or syllabics. But if you just look up a word like a Tim, it operates like a lot of dictionaries. You see you have a couple of options. You have these info bubbles that if you hover over, tell you more information about it, like we see here. In this case, we tried to use really simple terminology that wasn't based in linguistics. So rather than saying something is a singular noun, we say it's a naming word versus an action word, which would be a verb. And there's only one of them. If you would like linguistic terminology, we have the option to turn that on. But we just found that users weren't particularly happy or finding it useful. So we followed their requests and moved it to this. I'm not going to do a demo of the sound, but there is an option to hear a recording of this if a recording exists. And if we take a verb form, we see, you know, a really similar situation. Again, various options. We just put in Wapameo. Now, one thing to notice here is that in this, the dictionary that is at the base of this uses these little hats over the first A and the last E. I didn't type that in here. Our system is smart enough to know that that's what we meant and give it to us. So if we actually go into one of these entries, you'll see we have the basic, like he or she witnesses, she or he witnesses someone. We tell you what dictionary we got this from. There's some more information here that is meaningful to somebody, I'm sure. And then we have basically a paradigm or a list of all the various forms. So like I see him, you see them, we see you, and so on. And in Cree, you know, each one of these verbs can have hundreds, or I think even thousands technically, of these forms. And we list all of them. So we go through here, you can see we have quite a lot. The way that we did this was not actually by listing them all out, because we couldn't do that for every verb. Instead, that computational model is able to say, you know, I know the pattern of how you say, I do X to you, let's say. And then it just plugs in the appropriate verb where needed. You'll also notice some of these have little speakers next to them. That means that there is a recording. We won't get into this. Okay, then we also have the ability to look up complex forms. So often dictionaries, you know, if in English, if you look up the form like run, you're not going to find the word running as well. You're going to only find the word run because that's it. The dictionary expects you to know how those two are related. In this case, we didn't want that. It's not super helpful for us. So what we decided was, how can we make this so that it can recognize a fully inflected form? So like pehua wapamaya wawe, I apologize for the stress on that. I'm sure it wasn't great. This long form, it's able to understand, it can break it into its pieces and tell you about it, and it can recognize that it's a form of Wapameo. So we found this to be really useful for speakers who, are maybe like looking at a text and they don't have the vocabulary to necessarily recognize that this form is in fact a related word to Wapameo. The other in testing beta option that we have is sort of automatic translation. So because we have that underlying model, we're able to recognize that natatoskan means something like I work in English. And so just ignore this auto one, that's the in testing phase stuff. That gives you that. We have a little robot to tell you like, hey, this is automatic. We didn't verify this with anybody. And then we can also go the other way. So if we search they crawled, which is like a fully inflected English form, a full sentence, but actually a single Cree word, it gives us ki pimatat simuak. And it does that sort of without having to go through a collection of options, and it's able to sort of anticipate what you were looking for. So these are the things that a smart dictionary can do. I know that's a lot, but the idea is that the dictionary that can basically anticipate what you were trying to do. The next we're going to talk about are word builders. So here's a video that I have. This is for Cree. It's basically an auto completion system. So this is somebody typing. Maybe they're a learner and they're knowing parts of words, but they don't exactly know how to build a word. Here you can see they're typing pieces. It gives them suggestions for what they might mean, and they're able to click through those. And then it gives them more suggestions, and then they're able to come up with this word here. And then they can just copy that and they can paste it somewhere else. Another word builder option is, if it'll let me go here, is one for Gonawakan, which is a Iroquois language, I believe, out in Ontario. And the idea with this is that it helps you build words by selecting pieces visually. So in this case, you can see there's a long list of words like able being able, accept, agree, argue, and you can sort of say, what do I want from this? In this case, I chose something like to become frightened of something. Then it gives you the options. Now that it knows generally what verb you want, it says who's involved. And so then you can choose you, her, him, they. It also gives you a nice little visual wheel here that allows you to do this. So you can choose that. So I've chosen her, become frightened of something, and now I have to choose the time that it's happening. And in this case, I choose she is becoming frightened of something. So it's sort of currently happening. And then just like that, it gives you a word, yako te runs. I probably forgot to stop there, but it gives you a word there. So you built a word, and I know nothing about the language, and I was able to do this. Obviously, none of these things that I've shown you so far are actually going to, teach you the language. They're going to help you with other tasks related to language learning. They, in and of themselves, will not replace any sort of, elder involvement, let's say, or other information. Then finally, we have language learning apps. I'm sure we have all heard of Duolingo, so I'm not going to cover it, although I think it recently got Navajo on it. But there is a movement for language learning apps through companies like Transparent, where they create less polished versions of Duolingo, basically. So they're little games. They try to gamify the system. They have sounds, then for the Ojibwe version here, and then the English translation. And then you can go through that. It's not quite as involved as something like Duolingo, but here's one for Denesosene. So, here you're reading the form and then repeating it in English. It's basically a vocabulary testing thing. And then this one isn't an app in and of itself, but it's a organization that is involved called 7,000 Languages. And it's trying to create language games for various Indigenous languages. The only issue with these two that I was showing you here from Transparent is that I believe they cost money. You get like a free trial, but they cost money. I don't really want to I personally don't want to deal with that can of worms. So in conclusion, basically, there's a lot of new language technologies. They can help us through documentation and through revitalization. And honestly, like as time goes on, what we can do with Indigenous languages is just going to grow. Historically, the bottleneck has just been in that a lot of the technologies need a lot of written text, and for various reasons, that's not available for many Indigenous languages of Canada. But as artificial intelligence gets stronger, we're able to do a lot more with a lot less. What we can do now, we never thought possible 5 years ago, let's say. I also didn't cover a lot of things like speech synthesis, speech recognition, things like book publishing out of things like Bloom, keyboards for your phone, augmented reality systems, but those also exist. And then sort of something I'd like to leave with is that these are all really cool technologies that can be really helpful, but obviously there's, enormous ethical concerns about, what does it mean to be using these? Are you using these responsibly? Can you trust the people who are selling them to you? It's not something that I can answer here. That's not something I can answer for anybody, but it's definitely something that I think you really have to think about, because a lot of the time the technologies seem so helpful, and you only find out about the sort of downsides later on. And so, a big part of what I do when I'm teaching coursework on stuff like this is really try to hammer into people like, why is Google approaching you to try to do something? What is their end goal here? Because they exist to make money. What does that mean for everybody? So yeah, this is not switching for me. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you, everybody. And I hope that we can continue the conversation.